This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the show, I have Harry Binswanger. And Harry is an American philosopher. He's a writer. He's also an objectivist, a longtime associate of Ayn Rand. And I caught his interview recently with Henry Blodgett because Harry wrote a very controversial article talking about how society should give back to the 1% and how valuable the 1% is. So it was an interesting discussion that Blodgett and Harry both had. And I wanted to have Harry on to expand on what they were talking about and get into it in even more detail. Our conversation follows. So I have to tell you, you might have to tap out at some point in time in this conversation, because I am sure that I could talk to you all day long about the topics, many of these topics, which I love to talk about. The first thing I kind of really want to throw out there, just an experience that I had early in my mid-20s. I had never read Atlas Shrugged. And I had one of the most famous traders ever say to me, Michael, we're going to have a fine conversation. First things first, go read Atlas Shrugged. And so I find it, I have that lead up because I find it funny when I see your appearance with Henry Blodgett that there's all this writing and all this negativity when I know for beyond a shadow of a doubt, there is such a silent majority that just love the logic and the thinking that Ayn Rand put out there. And I think it's so interesting when you appear on a show and it's like they just try to make you sound like you're a kook or a crazy person or something. And it's like, hold on, who's crazy here?
Yeah, what I would receive the kind of response in general to my article that one would expect from an article advocating killing all the firstborn among the population. What I actually was suggesting that is that we should be grateful for the creative intellectual acts of the wealth creators. We should be grateful to and praise Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, the people who innovate and give us the products and the standard of living that we have. And that was interpreted as some kind of horrendous evil, as if these people had not done what they obviously have done. So it's strange, that I'm calling for an act of gratitude and a symbolic expression of it in exempting the great wealth creators from income tax. And I'm treated as if I called for mass extermination.
And ultimately, you are asking for an inspiration to say, let's look to these people for inspiration. Let's don't say, hey, can we, Mr. Politician, have another handout so we can get through our next day? I think what you're correctly doing is you're saying, let's be inspired by the creators. Let's be inspired by the inventors. And somehow or another, that gets lost. And like you said, you get positioned as an evil guy.
Yes, but I am evil by the code that most people accept half the time. Most people have moral contradictions. And part of the morality is the code of self-sacrifice, the code that says the good consists of denying yourself, of giving up, of renouncing, of mortifying the flesh, and serving something higher than yourself. To the extent that people hold that, what I'm saying is evil by that standard. I reject that standard. And the standard that people live by, and I do mean live, most of the time, is the code of rational self-interest, the code that says my life is my highest value, my life is precious to me, I have a limited time on this earth, and I want to spend it helping myself achieve my goals, not mortifying myself and renouncing goals. And by that morality, the morality of egoism, what I'm saying is just common sense.
It is common sense, and somehow or another, that common sense gets commonly lost. And I look at the example, the conversation you had with Henry Blodgett, and he was talking about his 130 employees and saying, well, I want to share with them. And okay, that's great. But you know what he never said? He never said how much he's sharing with them. He never said, I own this percentage of the company and they get this percentage. And if I kept going down the rabbit hole of his argument, I would start to say to myself, well, hold on. Why does Steve Jobs have more than why did he have more than $50,000 in the bank? Why has Warren Buffett been worth over $20 billion? Why is Bill Gates worth over $20 billion? Should they have not just given it all away and never had any money their whole life, even though they were at the opportunity to be a creator and to create it all? I just did not follow the logic where Blodgett was going, and it ultimately was this weird, and I see this almost every time somebody comes on to talk about Ayn Rand, the major media just wants to paint everybody as crazy.
Let me ask this about it. People don't understand the nature of trade. Someone like Blodgett says, well, the entrepreneur or the capitalist should share his gains with the people who work for him beyond their salary, that is, which means give them bonuses, give them more than their production is worth. Well, why doesn't it work the other way around? Why doesn't he say, you know, this guy on the production line should throw in a couple of extra hours of unpaid labor to help the company and to help the owners of the company and to help the shareholders? Why does it only go one way? Why, if a trade is a mutually advantageous exchange, why is one party required to give up his advantage, but the other party is not asked to do the same? And the answer is, there's an answer to that as to why people see it as asymmetrical. The answer is that need is considered a claim. The underdog, the little guy, is considered entitled to special considerations, special rights from those who are not in need. And this is, this, if it's not generosity, if it's need demanding a right from those who are not needy, it's a formula for death. It's a formula for destruction. It says, if you lack a value, if you can't produce, you are to be rewarded, and you have a mortgage on the claim of the lives of those who can produce. So it says, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, the formula of Karl Marx, which says, punish ability, reward lack of ability. That is what Ayn Rand calls the morality of death. So I'm sorry to go on it so long, but let me summarize it as 2 points. One is, in a trade, both parties expect to win, and neither party should be asked, hey, give up something of what you want just to make the other party happy. And in a trade between someone with more and someone with less, you can't damn the person who has more because he has more.
Well, okay, now you bring up a great issue that I was going to kind of go into. I've had some decent success in my life, and I've had a chance to meet and become friends with people that have had crazy success. And the one thing I know about myself is I never sit down with them and treat them different. I never act different towards them. We're the same people. We both put our clothes on our pants one leg at a time. But that's not the case in modern society. And I think the one thing that maybe that people that share many of Ayn Rand's ideas, the one thing we don't do is we don't properly turn around and say, hey, hold on. You sound like a jealous person. You really sound like a jealous person. And I ultimately think somehow or another jealousy has been legislated, mandated into some kind of noble cause. I'm jealous. Well, this is wonderful. You're jealous. And they disguise it all under all these different academic sounding whatever, but it comes out as just pure jealousy to me. I mean, life is not fair. Somebody might get lucky, or somebody might not get lucky. Maybe they invent a great company, but life is not fair. And I don't understand how we've moved to this place where this lack of fairness, you know where I'm going with this? It just drives me crazy.
Yes,
obviously.
yes. I'd like to push a little farther. Ayn Rand wrote an article called "The Age of Envy," in which she said that it's worse than jealousy. Jealousy, she said, is when I want to have what you have. I am, upset because I want to have it, but you've got it. What she says is going on today is envy, which is, I don't want what you have, but I don't want you to be happy. I don't want you to have and enjoy what you have just because it makes me feel bad that you have it and I don't. It's a reproach. And I think this is what's behind the outpouring of hatred that I received from the left. I think what's going on is people feel I'm a loser and I resent the fact that anybody's a winner because it just spotlights how bad I feel about myself. So there's hatred involved, but it's self-hatred, which they blame on the people who are successful. As if, well, if nobody else were happy, I wouldn't feel so bad being unhappy. So let me make everybody else unhappy. There's an old Russian joke. The Russians are famous for this from time immemorial, from this attitude that I don't want anybody else to be happy. There's an old joke about a genie who appears to a Russian peasant and says, I will grant you one wish, but whatever I give you, I will give your neighbor in the next farm twice as much. So the peasant thinks for a second and he says, pluck out one of my eyes. So that's the mentality. I don't care how bad off I am as long as no one else is better off. That's, beyond jealousy. That's resentment.
Let me take it a step further. Is it the envy of someone else's happiness, or is it ultimately, and this is going to, I'm sure some people out there are going to start laughing when I say this, but I don't care. Is it ultimately the envy of heroicism? It's the envy of people that just, it's their envy of people being heroic.
I think so in this sense. It's envy of people being good, of people being right and knowing that they're right. The one thing that the person who feels unworthy himself hates is another person who has achieved what he hasn't morally. It's a desire that no one be morally accountable and that no one hold himself up as good, morally good. I think that's what is, the corollary of success. It's all one package. This guy is happy, this guy is rich, this guy is proud, this guy has done something with his life, this guy deserves praise, and I don't. So I hate him for it. We're talking about the end result. We're talking, we're mentioning Bill Gates, we're saying Warren Buffett, we're saying Steve Jobs, we're talking about massive amounts of money. I think one thing that some of the envy out there discounts or doesn't consider is the start. Is that the great entrepreneurial minds don't start like the people that envy them start. They take risks in ways. They don't follow the rules that those people that are so envious of them do. And so sometimes we all end up looking at the massive wealth that an entrepreneur might create over the course of a lifetime. But we definitely, I get it, but I think a large segment of this audience just forgets that, hey, Steve Jobs was starting a business in a garage. Warren Buffett was at one point in time not managing a huge amount of money. Bill Gates, basically, and I'll add this about Bill Gates, there's a new book out, I've not read it, by Malcolm Gladwell called Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. Bill Gates battled IBM. He essentially stole IBM's lunch. But then 20, 30 years later, Bill Gates is an evil guy with too much money. He's giving it all away, so he's not evil now, but you see where I'm going with it all. Yeah. The people, it's easy to forget that money is earned. Leaving aside people who inherit money, in which case it was earned by their parents, Money is earned, which means it's achieved in free, fair, open, voluntary trade. So the reason why Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, or Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon or any hedge fund operator or any rich person, the reason why they're rich is someone paid it to them. Someone gave them that money in trade. Why? Why did they get a huge salary, or why did they own stock that's highly valued by the market? Because they gave more than that in return. They created wealth that people voluntarily bought. So we are the ones who've made the rich rich. It's, in the leftist imagination, the rich somehow scoop up money and goods that were lying around unattended. So they grab them away from someone else. But the only way to grab someone's wealth is to use physical force, guns, clubs, armies, mafia. And this is not how Buffett, Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, or any of these people got their money. They didn't go out and hold up millions of people. They offered a product that millions of people thought was worth more than the money that they gave the capitalists. So it's created. It's wealth created.
The only thing I'm going to add in there about, because I say this a lot, it does bother me, though, that some of the investment banks in the fall of 2008 got governmental bailouts to survive. So that, I think that to some degree, if it's a level playing field, and you can take a risk as an entrepreneur and you can make a lot of money and you can also lose a lot of money, but then if there's a government backstop, I know you're not supporting the idea of government backstops, to say the least.
No, I'm not. There is, in Atlas Shrugged, there are a lot of villains who are men of the mixed economy, as she calls them, men who have who get favors from Washington, men who pull the strings of political power. For instance, Orrin Boyle is a steel mill runner who gets his money from Washington. He'd be like the Solyndra of Atlas Shrugged. However, I do want to say that the extent of favors and bailouts that were given has been greatly exaggerated by the leftist media. Half of those banks, the 8 banks that were summoned to Washington during the crisis, half of them did not want to take the bailouts. They were forced to. They were forced to accept the bailouts. And I know this from bankers that I've talked to personally who were involved in getting bailouts. They were told, some of them who didn't need the bailouts, they were told, if you don't take the bailouts, we'll come and examine your books. And believe me, we can find that you're in trouble and need to be regulated and told what to do and be in big trouble with Washington. So there were weak banks. There were weak banks that needed a bailout. But the theory of the government, and this was the Republican administration, the theory of the government was if we just bail out the weak banks, it'll signal to everybody which banks are weak. So we've got to take all the top 9 banks, 8 or 9 banks, and force them all to take bailouts in order to hide who is the weak one and who isn't. So be careful, of saying, well, because a bank took a bailout, it was seeking favor in Washington. At least half of them weren't.
Good point. That's a good point. Hey, I want to bring up something too. There's a bunch of topics I want to jump at with you, but the Wal-Mart heirs, Sam Wal-Mart, Sam created a lot of wealth, and I've seen some metrics where it says something to the effect that the Walmart heirs have essentially the same wealth as the bottom 30 to 40% of all Americans. And I think what's interesting about that is it's probably the very group of people, and I'm not making a value judgment or anything, but it's probably the very group of people that have walked into those stores, and whether you like Walmarts or not, people have voted with their dollars
Yeah.
They have voted with their wallets to say, here, Walmart, you might be selling us products that are eliminating our jobs. You might be selling us products that are killing the small stores in our neighborhoods. But guess what? We are lined up in droves because we can now buy stuff for our house and our life that we could never otherwise afford. And here we are. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you so much money that your heirs are now going to have this immense amount of wealth. It's quite interesting.
Yes, Sam Walton was a great innovator. He pioneered many aspects of what people love about Walmart, and I love it and wish that it wasn't barred from being in Manhattan where I am. One of the things was trading with low-cost producers in Asia, such as China. He brought that into mass use and lowered prices tremendously without lowering quality much. Then the other thing he did was establish this system of regional big box stores that are all networked together. I read an interesting story of how he opened his very first store in Arkansas. He had elephants come to be on parade to draw people in, and he hadn't realized that elephants make elephant dung, and that elephant dung is huge. So there were the elephants walking around, leaving their droppings everywhere, and no one wanted to enter the store. So every time he opened his store, he made mistakes, but then he corrected his mistakes. He was very big on the need to try things and then correct the errors and improve and improve and improve. And that's how he built this tremendous source of popular satisfaction. Walmart. And I speak as one who every time I go to the suburbs, I look for a Walmart store to go into because we don't have them here in Manhattan.
So I want to jump to something that's a little bit different from Atlas Shrugged. It's one of my favorite scenes, and I want you to paint the scene, and I want you to kind of explain the logic behind it. And and I'll let you name the character, but there's a famous character, and he's kind of I think it's at a cocktail party, and he overhears a woman essentially say, well, he's a product of money, and money's the root of all evil. And this gentleman, I believe is he a miner from down in South America? He turns around and says,
yeah,
you think money is the root of all evil. Why don't you run with that for a second? Almost just kind of explain the scene and kind of go with the idea that there are a ton of people in society who think money's the root of all evil. Money's just a means of exchange.
Well, first of all, it has a big plot meaning. The speech is by the character named Francisco d'Anconia, who's the heir of a copper fortune, but not a worthless heir, an heir who's building the d'Anconia copper to bigger success than it has ever had before. And he is actually there to convert to his ideology a steel producer who is also at the same party. So the reason why he makes this speech is to educate and interest the steel producer, Henry Reardon. And the speech is about the meaning of money, the meaning of making money, why the making of money is the promotion of human well-being. And he explains in what must be a 5-minute speech, it's about 4 pages of the novel, to the people at this anniversary party, actually, of the steel magnate. He explains that money is made by voluntary exchange of the best effort of one man for the best effort of another, and that it calls forth the best in people, and that the only alternative to dealing with each other by means of offering money, that is offering values, is dealing with each other by whips and chains and guns. It's money as the symbol of voluntary trade, of making an offer, versus compulsion, slavery, stealing. It's one or the other, he says, and the money is the code of respect for the mind and choices of the other party, whereas the gun says, do what I say or else. So like the tax collector is not making money, he is taking money, he is seizing money. But Sam Walton or Steve Jobs or whatever is making money, that is taking resources that are worth a certain amount on the market and producing something that's worth more than that on the same market. So the profit of the producer is a measure of the value he has created. It is exactly equal to what he has created. So Francisco in this speech, and I can't do it justice because it's artistically presented, it's witty, it's exciting, but he is explaining why the love of money is the root of all good, not literally of all good, but of a great deal of human good, because there are exchanges that are not monetary. But of the commercial exchanges, love of money is the root of good, not of evil.
Yeah, I love that. I will occasionally just find that passage online and reread it every couple of years. It's just fantastic. It's because there's such a knee-jerk reaction when you sometimes hear money is the root of all evil, and that's such a brilliant rebuttal to such a simpleton type thought that, money is the root of all evil. So let me jump on you on a slightly different direction as well too. There is a business author that I really love out there, a guy named Seth Godin, and I'm starting to realize that even though I don't think I've ever read him mention it anywhere, his constant message to people today is like, look, technology is arbing away the need for people. Okay, entrepreneurship is the most noble calling. You must create art. If you create art, you have a chance to get a premium. And if you think about it, it's such the messages of Fountainhead. It's such the messages of Atlas Shrugged. And, it's interesting that I see Ayn Rand's messages woven through culture, but they often don't mention her. And it's really funny is some of the very people that might criticize you if you came on and did an interview might, without mentioning Ayn Rand, be promoting her very ideals in their daily life.
Yes, there's been a big upsurge, particularly in the Obama years, of influence of Ayn Rand and interest in and sales of her novels. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. You're seeing the term statism today. Statism. That is a word that she didn't coin, but that no one used it or made it popular but she. Statism means any concentration of power of physical force in the government at the expense of individual rights. So statism is a wide term that embraces socialism, fascism, cronyism, any form of government control over the individual, investing power in the state is statism. She popularized that word, which was never heard before her. The other term that you hear now, particularly from the Tea Party, and it rightly so, is limited government. Again, she didn't coin that term, but she's the one who stressed that term and made it popular. So through those two terms entering, and there's a third one which I can't remember off the top of my head, she's actually shaping the course of political discussion now, but not enough yet.
I'll give you one that I saw the other day that I think she would have coined. So as the new healthcare laws rolled out, and I have a real disdain for the whole political system these days in DC. There's, as you mentioned, a lot of the bailout stuff happened under Bush, so there's plenty of blame to go around. But right. I saw this new healthcare law. They have invented a new character, so to speak, and they call it a navigator. And I noticed that they use a capital N with the word navigator. So here we are now indoctrinating the entire country to this new term that I'd never heard until the day that these exchanges started, a navigator. And I read the fine print on it. A navigator is required to be unbiased. And you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is almost like they almost went back to Atlas Shrugged and the stuff that she was kind of poking fun at and used the verbatim ideas and concepts that she was poking fun at to actually introduce this new healthcare legislation.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a tactic that is widespread on the left and is used in philosophy too, which is take over the terms of your enemy and redefine them if they sound good to name the opposite. It's a very dishonest thing. You notice that in Obamacare, he talks about exchanges and he talks about free market arrangements. And even the term single payer is not the right term. It's a single looter, the government. The socialized medicine is what is involved here, not paying or exchanges on a marketplace. They're famous for that, for the left, for instance, taking over the language of rights. You have a right to health care. You have a right to an education. No, rights is a term denoting freedom from interference, freedom from physical force. You can't have a right to be supplied with something by someone else. That would mean he has no right to the product of his effort. So they took over the language of rights. They're taking over the language of the free market. They're taking over the language of exchange. They're taking over the language of payment and take investment. Obama says we've got to invest in our infrastructure. No, what he's saying is we've got to seize investment money from people who are trying to invest on their own and use it for what government wants to use it for rather than they who earned it want to use it for.
You know, Harry, I had the good fortune or bad fortune, as you might see. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, about 15 miles outside in Virginia. So I intimately was able to see. And by the way, the 4 wealthiest counties in the United States of America right now, I think 3 of them are Virginia and 1 of them is in Maryland, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. I mean, that's almost all you need to know. It's not Greenwich, Connecticut. It's not L.A. It's not San Diego. It's not Manhattan. It's the counties that surround Washington, D.C. That alone should cause people to, even if you say to yourself, you know what, Mike, Harry, I just completely disagree with you. I'm very liberal and I have these views on the left. But you got to scratch your head when you say that the wealthiest counties are surrounding Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that ties right into the money speech of Francisco that you referred to. He said when you observe more people getting rich by political pull than getting rich by earning it in free trade, your society is doomed. And I'm afraid we're just at that tipping point right now.
You know, I when you say you think we're afraid, what in your mind beyond all the obvious? Why? I mean, look, I think, for example, you've got the Fed doing all kinds of stuff. You got interest rates artificially put to zero, which means probably we're in the middle of real estate and equity market bubbles. But I mean, why do you think we're at the tipping point? I'm just curious your opinion.
Because it's basically an intellectual issue. The populace doesn't understand enough to take the steps that are required. For instance, we're at the tipping point because we're running out of resources. That is, we're running out of loot. But there's not enough money to take from people to give all the claimants all the.
But they can keep printing it, Harry.
Yeah, they can keep printing paper, but they can't print that which the paper is to pay for, which is real goods and services. But the problem is symbolized by the government shutdown. How do the majority of people understand this shutdown? I think they feel Well, the Republicans just don't want to give to the people that need the things given to them. They don't understand it as we're at the end of our rope. We keep raising the amount of our debt. We've raised the debt. I just researched this last night. We've raised the debt limit 74 times since March 1962. 74 times we've said, okay, we won't be able to meet the current debt limit, but we'll meet the next one. Oh, not that one, but the next one. 74 times since 1962. So people don't understand that you have to draw a line and say, no more borrowing, government. They look at it instead as, well, Republicans are hard-hearted. And that kind of lack of understanding does scare me.
Well, let me probe a little bit there, because I really have a strong distrust and dislike of both parties. I mean, obviously, if the Republican Party had some real adherence to some of the principles we've been talking about that Ayn Rand wrote about many decades ago, I could believe in it. But when you see what took place under the Bush administration, all of the foreign entanglements, when you see the debasement of the currency, when you see the Fed actions, and when you see a lot of the personal liberty violations that definitely started under Bush, the spying type stuff, it makes it really hard for me to. I don't know what options really exist. I don't know how Ayn Rand would have thought about Ron Paul or his son, but it seems like Ron Paul would be the closest to her principles of any of the people out there today. Is that fair in your mind?
No, absolutely not. She would have torn his heart out and cut it up into little pieces, because Ron Paul has two things that are absolute anathema to us. One is he's anti-abortion. He is head of, or was head of, Libertarians for Life, which is an anti-abortion group within the libertarian movement. Ayn Rand was very firmly in favor of the rights of the mother to control the contents of her body. And of course, she was an atheist and didn't believe in any kind of mystical soul in a one-celled embryo at conception. And the other thing is his foreign policy. Ron Paul's foreign policy is one of pacifism. He says we shouldn't intervene in other countries, which, yeah, I can agree with that if stated. But what he means by that is that we should never defend ourselves. For instance, Ayn Rand was very much in favor of Israel in the war. I think it was the 7 Days War. I'm not sure which of the two wars in the 70s, but in both of them, she came out in favor of Israel. And Ron Paul is not in favor of Israel. He's agnostic, or worse, between the cause of civilization and freedom, which as represented by Israel, compared to the Arab states, which are dictatorships. So the foreign policy, she believed that we should have a foreign policy of national self-interest, and that national self-interest does not equate to never using force overseas and never having military action. So she would probably have invaded Iran, or advocated that she would.
Well, you know what I love about your answer is, because here I go down one path, and I'm essentially trying to get some balance, because you've mentioned many times in the conversation, mentioning the left by name. But then here I ask you this question, make the comparison with Ron Paul, and you throw out two things that the left would surely love.
Yes, it's not a matter of left versus right, but in traditional terms, I don't think this is too true anymore. But the old left, let's put it that way, the liberals, like Jack Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey kind of thing, Mayor Ed Koch here in the city, they were for personal freedoms, but economic controls. And the old conservatives were for economic freedom and personal controls. So, for instance, the old liberals used to be very big on free speech, and the old conservatives wanted laws against obscenity and were much more on the pro-censorship side. But I'm not sure that that division is holding up much more, because the new leftists don't want any kind of freedom. And the new conservatives are more religious, and they even worse than the old conservative. But we're for freedom everywhere. We're for and when I say we, I mean advocates of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. We say that people have inalienable rights. They have a right to life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. That means that the government cannot interfere with their property, which is economic controls, and it cannot interfere with their liberty. It cannot censor their speech. It cannot dictate what they do in the bedroom. And economic freedom and personal civil rights freedom are what's required. Now, fortunately, there are, what's called libertarians today include a large number of people who are not crazy like Ron Paul and who do want freedom across the board. But it's kind of been all mushed together into one thing. There are libertarian anarchists, libertarian pacifists, and then there are the people who accept the term libertarian but don't advocate any of that nonsense, but they just want full freedom.
Yeah, my quick and dirty one I always say to people is I want the government out of my bedroom and out of my pocketbook, and that kind of gives me nobody to vote for.
That's a good formulation. Out of the bedroom and out of the pocketbook, yeah.
And there's no one to vote for. Sorry.
There's no one to vote for. I think some of the people coming up in the Tea Party are better and are much closer to what we want. And I think, heaven help me if I am wrong in this, but I think Rand Paul is better than Ron Paul. I don't think Rand Paul, he's probably just as bad on the abortion issue, but I think his foreign policy is a little bit more pro-American than his father's.
Well, I got to tell you, the main reason that I wanted to have you on today is because I saw that interview with Henry Blodgett, and they had a point they wanted to make, and they wanted to use you as a prop. And so I thought to myself, this would just be a nice conversation. I was not familiar with your work, but I just knew that it'd be if we had a nice long form conversation, people could listen to it and think, well, that guy Harry sounds fairly normal. Maybe I like him, maybe I don't, but I can't really argue with the basics of what they're talking about. It's pretty straightforward common sense. Then
I should refer people, maybe you, to my Forbes column that generated the Blodgett interview.
Absolutely. Name it. We haven't even talked. Why don't we'll wrap up today talking about that and maybe some of the feedback that you got. Why don't you name the title of the article and talk about what you did? Because we didn't jump into it in the beginning. I just went straight into to Ayn Rand. So
if you go to Forbes.com and search for my name, Harry, Harry Binswanger, that's a hard one, but probably Harry B will bring it up. My column this month is entitled Give Back. Yes, it's time for the 99% to give back to the 1%. It makes the 2 points that there's no unconditional obligation to, quote, give back to the community because there is no such thing as the community. And all the individuals that one dealt with were paid at the time, so there's nothing to give back. And the second point is, if anybody owes anybody else, it's the average Joe who owes the great wealth creators. Someone like Steve Jobs or Henry Ford or Thomas Edison give much more to the world than the man on the assembly line. And Henry Blodgett and people who are criticizing me say, well, look, the Henry Ford couldn't have his company without the man on the assembly line, the employees. And of course, the answer is that's correct. And the workers do produce value, and that's why they're paid. But if you're going to say, well, Henry Ford creates value, and the sum total of all his workers also create a value in about, approximately the same ratio, I don't have a problem with that. So in other words, if you say the man at the top contributes about the same, maybe more, maybe less, than the 5,000 employees together that he employs, okay, that's arguable. I don't know if it's true or not. But you can't compare him to one employee and say, well, why should he be earning 300 times the salary of the one employee? He's responsible for the entire direction of the company. And compare him to the 5,000 employees and their salaries aggregated. So it's this envy that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, like I said, almost every time, here you have this silent majority of people that are clearly reading Atlas Shrugged, they're reading The Fountainhead, and I've met so many people, it's amazing. You get behind the scenes with some of the biggest movers shakers in my world, the finance world, and like Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand are the tip of their tongue. And then, but when major media gets a hold of it, it's this desire to, and look, Ayn Rand in today's pretty person, perfect posture culture, Ayn Rand would not fit in, because today it's so much about image and it's not about the words and the reason and the content. And so I think that's partially what happens when you go on a show like Blodgett, is instead of letting you have some time to explain, it all becomes sound bites. And if somebody watches that interview closely, you're literally destroying their arguments and they have no responses and they just move on. And then the interview's over. And you're like, hold on. Did Blodgett just make it seem like he won the argument? I didn't really see that.
Yeah, I had the next day, I had an appearance on Closing Bell on CNBC, debating a socialist from the organization Demos. And her answer to what I was saying was, well, you would just have tremendous disdain for the non-super wealthy. And I said, no, there isn't an ounce of disdain in my column. And so she said, well, you have disdain, you have contempt for the average worker. And again, I said, no, I don't. Everybody contributes to the extent that he uses his mind to create value. It's just that the people at the top create more. So in her third segment, she said, well, you disdain the people, they just have nothing to say. They have nothing to say against what Ayn Rand is saying, really. And can I add something about Atlas Shrugged? I recommend Atlas Shrugged not just for its philosophy, not primarily for its philosophy, but for the thrilling experience of reading a novel with such heroes and such dramatic action, such grand scale adventure. It's not a tract. It's she called it a philosophical mystery story. It involves sex and a pirate and blowing up of mines and a new kind of invention that revolutionizes the world and all kinds of exciting things. And the heroes are people that you would love to meet in real life and you don't see in any other kind of fiction. The closest to it is if you've read Cyrano de Bergerac. The character of Cyrano is very close to the character of Francisco d'Anconia, for instance, in Atlas Shrugged. So I'm saying read it as a novel. Read it for the experience, the passion, the drama. Then if you get something out of it philosophically, so much to the good. But I think the rap on Atlas is from the left, is, it's a propaganda novel. It isn't. It's a work of art. It's a work of high drama and excitement. So enjoy it.
I'll add 2 cents to that too. I have to say I did like Atlas Shrugged for the philosophy. And I probably is one of those people that need to go back and read it again to maybe appreciate what you just described. I took the philosophy out of it straight out. I was like, oh my gosh, I relate to this. Boom. The work that she did that I really loved, and the character that I related to much more than let's say a John Galt, it was Howard Rourke and the Fountainhead. That was for me where I really said this is, somebody who's just said, you know what? I don't really care what you think of me. I'm doing my thing. I'm creating my art, and I'll get compensated for it. If I don't get compensated for it, but I'm just doing my thing. Let me do my thing. And I just like how he just seemingly just pushed through society just to do his thing. And that to me was almost more inspirational than anything else I read in Atlas Shrugged. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I wouldn't. That's a kind of contest that you can't lose, which is the greater inspiration.
Right.
A character in Atlas or in the Fountain. Yeah, Rourke's meaning and essence is independence. He does not think about what others think about him. He is not motivated by approval. He's not interested in the adulation or fame that he gets from other people. He's only interested in his work. He's asked at one point in the novel, what's the meaning of life? A friend asks him, what's the meaning of life? And they're outdoors, and he grabs a twig from a tree, a branch from a tree. And he says, this is the meaning of life. I can bend it and make a bow. I can combine it with other sticks and make a shelter. The earth and what you make of it to serve your vision, that's the meaning of life. Creative work is the meaning of life. And that's the kind of person Rourke is. There's never really been anyone like him in literature before. The closest there would be, and it's a very distant second, is An Enemy of the People, the doctor who's the hero of Ibsen's play An Enemy of the People. But I certainly urge people to read and discover Howard Rourke's changing experience.
Yeah, I do. I love that. It was very motivating for me, and I read it 15 years ago for the first time. So, Harry, let's wrap up. Where can people, if they want to go find out about the man who wants to see all of the millionaires and billionaires no longer have to pay taxes, where can they go to find out more about you, Harry?
Well, I would suggest my own blog. Not there's my Forbes column, but there's my own blog, which is HBList, HBLIST.com. And if you just Google my name, it will come up. Unfortunately, my name is kind of hard to remember because it's so weird. Harry Binswanger, which is BINSWANGER. So thank you for giving me a chance to plug that. And I do have a book coming out very shortly, but it's very abstract. It's on the theory of knowledge. It's entitled How We Know.
Get me a copy. I'll take a good read, and we'll get you back on the show to talk about it.
Okay.
I love these kinds of conversations.
Okay, very good.
Well, listen, Harry, you take care today. You're in Manhattan, you said?
Yes, I'm on the 16th floor of my apartment building in Midtown Manhattan, a stone's throw away from the Empire State Building.
Well, I'm in the hotbed of capitalism, Saigon, Vietnam. So... And that's actually a true statement for all of those out there. Yes, it is. Yes, the communist countries in Asia, they have communist governments and capitalistic ethos in the people. So it's kind of messy. Maybe it'll get straightened out one day, but for now, it'll have to do.
I was told that they actually use gold as money in Burma.
This would be the new Myanmar, right?
Yeah, they've gone back to Burma, I understand.
Really?
The name. because Myanmar was the socialist communist government adopted that name. Well, whatever they're calling themselves, somebody over there told me that in the black market, they use actual gold nuggets, gold bullion as trading vehicles.
You know, I've not been over there yet, but I've heard it is truly one of those places when you get out in the main city that it's changed some in the last year or two, but it just not too recently. It was like the land of no ATMs and all that stuff was just not there. I think
I'm sure it's primitive because it was destroyed by communism for so many years.
Yeah,
it's going to take time.
But I say this though, no matter what the governments are in this area of the world, the people, you walk around the streets of Saigon, and everybody is a merchant. Everybody is selling. Every first floor everyone's a merchant. Everywhere you go in the whole place. And, I love seeing that. I just love seeing people hustle and trying to make something happen. So.
Yeah. If you got time for one more reflection.
Sure.
I went to Poland and East Germany within 6 months of the wall falling and communism being ended. And what was shocking to me is the absence of any shops. So in New York, the ground floor of every single building is some kind of commercial establishment. Often several in this, in the coexisting the ground floors of the building. In East Berlin and in Warsaw, none. You couldn't find a store selling anything. Maybe one in every 4 blocks would be some kind of government outlet of where they dispense the goods. But private trading disappears under communism. It's illegal. And you're right, it is great to see private trade where it does exist.
Well, I don't know how. I mean, here it's different in the sense that, I'm not joking. You literally could go almost anywhere in Saigon. This is a city of 10 million people. It's not a very tall city. There's a few taller buildings, but it's mostly 3, 4, 5-story buildings. And every first floor is a business. It doesn't make a difference if you're in the nice section or the bad section. And there's so many businesses, you almost wonder what the redundancy level is. But so I don't know if that was the same case during before they opened up in the 90s. But it's I see the same thing in Shanghai and all the cities in China too. However China's doing it, it's. I took a bullet train from Shanghai to Beijing, almost 1,000 kilometers, and I've never seen more 30-story condo buildings being built in my life along the whole 1,000-kilometer journey. Yeah. So people can. It's definitely complicated, and we're not even have that conversation today. The governmental structures, but the business ethos of many people in Asia is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and if people on the left are concerned about, as they should be, ameliorating poverty, in front of their eyes, there has been the greatest leap up from poverty in the history of the human race in India and China. So 30, 40 years ago, they were desperately poor. Do you know that under Mao, the Chinese in the Cultural Revolution, as it was called, Chinese out of the cities traded babies, mothers traded babies to eat. So a mother couldn't bring herself, they were starving, had to eat their babies, but a mother couldn't bring herself to eat her own, so she would trade babies with someone else and eat someone else. That's the level of starvation that they had in the 70s, okay? And now the largest shopping center in the world is in China. And India, has greatly flourished. Now, why did these suddenly take off? They took off the moment they started moving away from statism, the moment they abandoned enforcement of communism and the socialist ideal and move towards free markets, capitalism, that's when people began to raise themselves up out of poverty.
Yeah.
So if those on the left really wanted to help the poor and end world hunger and establish world peace, they would become zealots for laissez-faire capitalism.
You know, one of the things, just to keep adding on here, though, because I know you enjoy this, is that my friends in Vietnam and learning from them, it's, you know, they don't have a backstop. They don't have a safety net.
Neither did we until Ronald Reagan.
Right. So there's the hustle. The hustle here is almost intoxicating, to where it's just like everybody is doing something. Everyone's in constant movement to make something happen. And that's an energizing feeling. And I'm not trying to be, hey, I'm a guy right now who happens to be in Southeast Asia saying something bad about America. If you go to New York City, where you live right now, that same hustle is in New York City. I just don't think the same hustle in New York City is spread all across America right now.
Well, the same hustle is in Midtown Manhattan. I'm not sure that it's spread out to the Bronx and so forth. But yeah, you're right. It used to be America. The story of America was everybody was pursuing the Horatio Alger dream of rags to riches. Everyone was trying to make his fortune. And that was the period of our fastest economic growth in the late 19th century. And it was the period of most capitalism, most freedom. If you look at history, you look today and you look at history, the degree of a country's freedom is the degree of its economic progress.
You know, one thing I'll add here at the very end is that as we talk about this entrepreneurial ideals, and if there's people listening that maybe are on the left and they're saying, hey, I just don't like this guy Harry, I don't like this guy Mike. But you know, the one thing you might not understand if you are coming from the pure left today is the feeling of creating, the feeling of being an entrepreneur, the self-satisfaction is something that you can't get from a government program. You can't get it from a handout. You can't, those are just ways to pacify you. It's like a sugar high. But the satisfaction you get from pulling your boots on and making something happen, that is worth living for.
Right. That goes back to the Howard Roark. The meaning of life is the earth and what you make of it, your work.
Hey, Harry, why don't you repeat your website one more time for us as we log out of here?
Right, hblist.com. Okay. That will take you to my blog.
Well, listen, it was great chatting, and let me know about the book, and we'll catch up again soon.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.